Hello and welcome back to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Europe Live. I'm Logan, Senior Content Producer here at Automotive Logistics and Ultima. Thank you so much for joining me for what I consider to be one of our most important discussions. No, I'm not talking about the European Super League. We can meet in the virtual bar afterwards for that chat. I'm talking, of course, about Europe's drive to become a leading global player in sustainable electric vehicle battery production. Right now, Europe is far off the pace compared to Asia, but joining me today to delve into how Europe can close the gap are three key stakeholders in the forms of BMW, Britishvolt, and ORBIS Europe. So enough of me, let's meet my first guest. Welcome to the stage, Justus Löbler, expert in sustainability and mobility strategy at BMW. Justus, great to have you here.
Thank you, Rich, and thank you for having me on this really exciting panel today. Allow me, before we jump into the panel discussion here, to make some remarks outlining our view on what I call the road to circular batteries here. But before we do that, I just want to point out that, of course, within the Super League conversations, there were no German clubs involved in that, and we're very happy to see that. But with that, let me start on the first slide, where we really have the starting point for this exciting conversation here. If you can go to the next slide, please. We have here an overview of why this topic is so vitally important, Rich, as you just said. We're going to look at an incredible increase of electrification in the automotive industry. And what you see at the top here is the portfolio of battery electric vehicles that the BMW Group will bring to the road until 2023. And more than half of this is already unveiled. You obviously know the BMW i3, which has been around for about 8 years now. We have the iconic Mini Electric, and we're getting more and more into the depth of our product portfolio as well. And we don't stop there. In the next 2 years, these 6 vehicles will be joined by another 4, bringing the total battery electric vehicle portfolio of the BMW Group up to 10 vehicles. And this is really a very exciting moment for us. We truly believe it is a game changer for the automotive industry, but it comes also with tremendous challenges in terms of supply and sustainability. And we're really excited to discuss a couple of these opportunities and challenges in this round today. If you look at the lower graph, on this slide, what you will see there is that with 2023, this growth is not going to stop. Quite the opposite, actually. It's going to accelerate through the next decade. So answering these questions and getting them right now is vital for this conversation and important to get the sustainability aspects of electric mobility right. Because electric mobility has a huge potential, especially if fueled with renewable electricity, to address the CO2 issues that we have in the supply chain with internal combustion engines, and thereby substantially reducing the impact that the automotive industry has on the climate. However, and we go to the next slide, please, if we look at the supply chain for these batteries, we have quite a reverse trend towards this positive impact on the use phase. In 2019, an average BMW vehicle emitted 10 tons of CO2 equivalent in the supply chain. So that is everything cradle to gate that happens before we put our hands on the vehicle, putting it together. Until 2030, so throughout this decade of extreme growth of electrification, this average number would go up to 14 tons, substantial increase here, mainly driven by the fact that we, of course, have to source these batteries for the electric vehicles. What we have said now is we, as a strong believer in electrification, have to that throughout the entire value chain of our vehicles, we get this right and ensure that the CO2 footprint doesn't grow. So we have said that and followed a very thorough analysis of the Science-Based Target Initiative here, that by 2030, we want to have measures in place to reduce actually our CO2 footprint cradle to gate from 14 tons down to 8 tons, which is a trend reversal from this growth that electrification brings. And this is really a challenge for us, given that it really is driven by this change from our internal combustion engines towards electrification, and there's a lot that will happen over the next 10 years. And what we'll see on the next slide is a couple of thoughts I wanted to share before we jump into the discussion here of how we think we can address this. And on the title slide, if you remember, we're talking about the road to circular batteries. And we really believe that reducing the CO2 footprint in our supply chain is not only about getting the supply side right, which is what we're going to talk here on the left side, but it's also about ensuring that at the end of the life of these vehicles, we deal with them properly and get them recycled. Firstly, talking about what we are doing on the raw materials and cell design side, this cradle to gate piece I was talking about. First of all, we've agreed with all of our battery manufacturers, wherever they might be on the globe, to use 100% renewable energy to produce these batteries. This is a huge step for us, and we're very, very proud to have that achieved, independent who these battery manufacturers are, where they are, and how much they supply. All of them have signed up to this. Secondly, for raw materials, and looking at cobalt and lithium especially, because these are the most important ones and also the most critical ones, we have said we want to source them directly. As an OEM, we take on the responsibility of ensuring that these materials that we put in our batteries and put in front of our customers are sourced to the highest standard that we as an OEM want to put out there. And for lithium and cobalt, that means that we're sourcing them from Morocco and Australia. But it also means, of course, and you might know that from cobalt and lithium, key partners in sourcing these materials are the Democratic Republic of Congo and Chile. And what we've said when we deliberately made the choice to move our raw material sourcing out of these countries is that we don't want to let the people there alone with the loss of business that we've brought towards them by moving the sourcing out. So we're working with the German government and other large suppliers very, very closely on local projects in these countries to ensure that we are able to get the mining and refinement there up to the same standards as we're observing in Morocco and Australia, and ultimately be able to bring this business back to these countries. Lastly, we are also looking at increased levels of secondary materials in our batteries. We're starting with nickel and aluminium, but we definitely don't stop there. This is really vital in order to get the CO2 footprint down, because if we use secondary materials, we avoid the negative impact and CO2 footprint from extraction and refinement. On the end-of-life vehicle and recycling side of things, we are very looking very, very closely at second life applications for our batteries. At our plant in Leipzig, for example, we use more than 400 second life i3 batteries to balance the energy supply for the plant that is produced by our own wind turbines there, helping to reduce the CO2 footprint, life cycle CO2 footprint of these i3s substantially by ensuring that we can use renewable energy whether the wind blows or not. We follow and welcome the ambitious material recovery targets for battery recycling that are laid out in the EU battery regulation proposal and will come effect in 2025 plus for an overall recycling target of 65% with material-specific recovery rates of greater than 90% for cobalt, nickel, and copper. These will be vital for us to, first of all, get the risk and CO2 footprint that comes along with battery production under control, but also ensure that within Europe as a whole, we can develop a more prosperous battery industry than we currently have. Lastly, we also take this, what we call extended producer responsibility, very, very seriously. And we have said we want to go beyond to taking back our vehicles for free and now offer our BEV customers a financial benefit for returning their end-of-life vehicles to us so that we can put them into our proper recycling processes, recover those materials, and loop them back into new vehicles that we're producing at that time. So this is really just a couple of the exciting things we are doing, and I hope this is a good starting point for our discussion later. And Rich, I'll give it back to you.
Great, thanks, Justus. Yeah, really good kicking off points. And whilst you were talking there, my colleagues launched a poll in the Hopin platform asking what percentage of European-produced EVs will include batteries also produced in the region by 2030. So we've seen some ambitious targets, just mentioned there, but keen to get the audience opinion. How realistic do you think that is? 0 to 25%, 26 to 50%, 51 to 75 or above 75%. So please do fill in the poll on the right-hand side of your platform, and we'll come back to that and discuss that later. Justus, thanks again for that great introduction. We'll be certainly picking up on a couple of those points in a panel discussion shortly. But for now, I'll say thank you, and I'd like to introduce my next guest, Isobel Sheldon, OBE, Chief Strategy Officer at Britishvolt, to the stage. Isobel, great to have you here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to come along and talk today. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, we're really excited to be involved with Britishvolt, and being a relatively new name in the automotive world, Britishvolt and the electric revolution, it feels very recent, what with a number of OEM announcements taking place, committing to electric futures. These things don't happen overnight. So perhaps you can share a little bit of the story behind Britishvolt and allude to some of your plans for Europe and beyond.
Yeah, I think you're right. Things don't happen overnight, and although the name of the company is a relative newcomer to the industry, or the people involved in the operation are not. We've spent a lot of time in the automotive industry and a lot of time in the battery industry. And certainly for myself and a number of other key individuals, it's been around about 20 years in the making to get to this point. So we're fairly old hands at this. And really the ambition is quite large, is to put 30 gigawatt hours worth of manufacturing capacity into the European economy, and to base that capacity in the United Kingdom. So we've acquired the land, we're raising the money at the moment, and we will be putting a spade in the ground in September this year. And we intend to have the first 10 gigawatt hours of the facility up and running by the end of 2023 for ramp up through 2024, and then follow that on by a further 10 gigawatt hour module in 2025, and then another 10 gigawatt hour module in 2027. And we've done this to really reflect the increase in demand profile over time, but also to protect against technology shift. There's a lot of noise about solid state in the industry and when that is or will not become available. So we need to make sure that the company is ready to pivot into those new technologies moving forward. So that third 10 gigawatt hours is reserved for solid state, should that become a commercial reality at that point in time. But we're also looking at global expansion too. So it's not just the UK story. We're looking at North America. And we'll be putting a large-scale facility in North America about 12 months behind the first 10 gigawatt hours in the UK, and then looking at other locations around the edge of Europe to support the car manufacturing industry that is built up around the edges of the European car manufacturing industry. So very large ambition. We intend to co-locate our supply chain on site too. So having cathode active material, anode active material manufacturing right next to the facility. And that way we can start to control the carbon content, and we control some of the costs a lot more effective than shipping these materials halfway around the world several times to get them manufactured. So overall, very large ambition. We're well underway with those plans at the moment, and we seem to be ahead of schedule and more than ahead of our targets at the moment.
Ahead of schedule is very impressive, and yeah, sounds like certainly a busy couple of months and couple of years coming up. But it sounds like a great story, and yeah, we wish you all the best of it, of course, in this exciting journey. And also really important, and we'll get into this later, just how important the sustainable aspect of that is. So you've brought that in right from the off, which is great. Perhaps some of you saw earlier today, my colleague Daniel Harrison gave a session on Europe's battery landscape, how it's evolving. Showed today that there are currently 11 battery plants existing today and operating today, with a further 32 plants planned or under construction. Isobel, my question to you, how will Britishvolt and others considered relatively newcomers to the market, well, how do you plan to compete with those already in operation, production, both Europe and globally? Perhaps some of those already getting cost efficiencies from large-scale operations.
So I think it's important to remember that if you look at the explosive growth in the electric vehicle market, there is insufficient battery capacity in Europe to be able to support that. The number that we tend to settle on is around about 74 gigawatt hour shortfall in battery manufacturing capacity by the middle of this decade. That is approximately the sum of all the battery manufacturing that's in Europe at the moment. So a significant shortfall in capacity means that this is very much going to be a seller's market rather than a buyer's market, which it has been to date. And I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that we need to put ESG and that sustainability right at the heart of the battery manufacturing process, because if we don't, we're looking at some of those increases in CO2 content that Justus was talking about earlier on. So we can't really get ourselves into a position where there's an increase in the carbon content of the vehicle fleet at all. We can't even let it creep up. So ESG has to be right at the heart of our manufacturing operations. We need to have a high percentage of renewables going into the basic manufacturing process, and also keeping that carbon content in the supply chain as low as possible. Now, when we start talking about some of the established manufacturers, of course, they've got legacy manufacturing facilities and have been planning and building their facilities for a number of years now. So some of those facilities are actually lumbered with out-of-date processes and processing technology that's not going to be as relevant towards the mid-2020s, and that's when we'll be bringing our particular facility online. So we're looking at the technologies that we need to put into manufacturing at that particular time frame, and then looking at the manufacturing processes, because don't forget, we've got a blank sheet of paper. Although we're experts and specialists in this field and have been for a long time, we do have a blank sheet of paper, and we can reimagine that battery manufacturing process to make sure it's producing the right materials that are more competitive than what's available at the moment, and also producing them very, very efficiently. And if you think about where the industry has come from, over the last 5 to 10 years, the industry has been built up mainly of compliance vehicles, and these are vehicles that have been typically modified from existing internal combustion engine platforms. And they've been quite compromised. They haven't really delivered on the promises. They don't have the range and the performance that the car buying public is waiting for. And now we've got these battery electric vehicles that are ground up design vehicles, and they're performing much better, which is just what the car buying public has been waiting for. So this means that we can start looking at a more tailored approach, and we can start taking the brand attributes and designing and building cells that are going to meet those vehicle performance requirements that the customer is expecting when they walk into a car showroom to buy these vehicles. And because that volume is now starting to build very, very nicely, we can start to fill up production lines with dedicated cell designs that are tailored towards those manufacturers' requirements. And we can help our customers, our OEM customers, with their brand differentiation. Because if you're using a one-size-fits-all cell strategy and buying the same technology that everybody else is buying, what is there to differentiate? The OEMs have differentiated themselves on powertrain for 100 years, and that's now disappearing. So the battery is going to be a critical differentiator to those markets moving forwards. And fundamentally, if you're opening the bonnet of your Fiat Panda and then open the bonnet of your Ferrari and you're finding the same things inside, you start to question the value proposition that you bought into.
Yeah, fantastic. And looks like you're well placed and future-proofing yourself there. And I'm going to be quite speculative here and just ask, there's clearly enough demand for enough of these companies that I mentioned starting up these gigafactories, but do you think we're going to see consolidation within the market, mergers, acquisitions, new partnerships between battery manufacturers, or simply is there just so much demand that they'll be able to compete sort of side by side? And perhaps maybe, sorry, I was just going to say with the technology changing as well, that might catch one or two out, perhaps, those who aren't future-proof and ready for that. So, yeah, just interested to get your perspective there.
It's probably the most interesting period in my 20 years in the lithium-ion battery industry for EV. There's so many dynamics that are going on at the moment. And I think, in the past, there was a view that there would be a one-size-fits-all standardization approach to drive the economics as low as possible. I think that's turning out not to be true. I think there was also a feeling that you put the battery plant as close to the car plant as possible, or maybe in the future the OEMs will put the car plant next to the battery plant. I think the biggest driver is that you put the battery facility where you can get the renewable energy, and that generally means you need access to either hydro or wind. I'm not entirely sure that there's going to be enough solar capacity that's going to be put in place to be able to power the sort of 150 megawatts worth of demand that a 30 gigawatt hour facility needs. So typically you'll see these facilities going into coastal locations where they can access wind. Well, that's certainly true in the UK. You can't go into the centre of the country because there's no renewables. You can't get the renewables to the facility. So I think that location is a really, really important part of that. And we've got a prime location, probably one of the best locations in the whole of Europe, putting a battery facility for those site dynamics. Transport and logistics we can bring in by maritime transport, so we don't put lorries onto the road. We've got the North Sea link providing us hydropower from Norway, and we've also got a lot of wind. And they're all coming in on site within 400 or 500 meters of the building, which makes it an absolutely ideal location. And I think those companies that have figured out those fundamentals are the ones that are going to win in this race in the battery industry to get capacity sort of as soon as possible. And I think you're right that there probably will be some consolidation going on in the market. I think some of the legacy facilities that are in the wrong place and don't have the right site fundamentals will become less attractive over time. And as that consolidation happens and those partnerships between the battery companies and the OEMs get stronger, and the realization of how important the site fundamentals are to building a successful facility are, to success in that marketplace, I think that's going to be a big driver and be a big differentiator between the companies that have got it right and the companies that have got it wrong. And then this dynamism as far as the technology choice and the formats and the types of cells that you put into vehicles is concerned, you've got to have flexibility, and you've got to be fairly dynamic in your market approach to make sure that you can capture those changes and future-proof your business moving forwards. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with billions of dollars worth of stranded assets that you're not going to be able to sweat and get a return on. So I think there's an awful lot of thinking needs to go into this industry moving forwards. And really some of the fundamentals that were driving some of the choices in the past are no longer valid. And I think that has changed. And the industry needs to adapt to a brave new world that we're all entering into.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And I think just picking up on a couple of points there, the dynamics potentially being OEM and battery, who holds the power, who holds the sway, the existing players versus the new players in the battery manufacturing as well as the technology angle. Isobel, let's keep going with you in the panel, but I'll say thanks for now, and I'm going to bring on my next guest. So thanks, Isobel, and welcome to the stage, Jürgen Krahé, Senior Commercial Director, ORBIS Europe. Jürgen, welcome to the stage. Great to have you here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Richard.
Great, thanks. And fresh off your think tank participation yesterday as well. So I hope you left some ammo in the tank for us today. So Jürgen, building a successful European EV battery production hub will obviously be highly dependent on the battery manufacturers, but also the wider supply chain, the wider specialists and key stakeholders like ORBIS. What are the considerations from your perspective, from ORBIS' perspective, that will determine Europe's ability to achieve its EV battery production and sustainability goals?
Yeah, complex question. ORBIS is a little bit older, so we are part of Menasha Corporation, which is more than 170 years old. ORBIS, this year, its 25th anniversary, by the way, stands from the very beginning for innovation, for durability, and for sustainability. Innovation, if it drives sustainability in the market, is very important. To have the ability to work with global teams, in this case with design teams, engineering teams, to find the right, most efficient products. Durability itself is already a part of sustainability from our point of view. As longer we can use a product, if the product life cycle is very long, it's obviously good for the environment. Sustainability, what we are talking about. So that has been, since 25 years, a very important pillar for ORBIS, not because the color of our logo is green. It's really because we have a closed, let's say, product life cycle. We start with using as much raw material, recycled raw material as possible to avoid virgin material. We have projects in the USA running in the moment to take the plastic out of the ocean and to build bulk containers and other FLCs and crates and KLTs out of that. During the production process, we are using used water, using wind energy, and trying to save CO2 as much as possible. Knowing that we are only a little piece in the supply chain, we believe it's very important and to provide the market with these efforts. Durability, I was already talking about it, means for us as well that products need to be modular. If a product is damaged, for instance, that we don't need to replace it at all. It's important for us to give our customers the opportunity to repair every single part on a product instead of a complete replacement. Another important part is the possibility to use packaging 100% for new products. So 100% recyclability is very important. And this is overall providing to the market, let's say, a closed loop of product life cycle to help our environment.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm interested to delve a little bit deeper with the electric revolution well underway, as we've established. How is this transformation, of the industry impacting ORBIS? How are you adapting?
Yeah, this is significant. Yes, we can say it's significant indeed, because it's obviously changing many of our processes, operational processes. Changing processes means automatically we need to rebuild and to build up a different organization in the future, which is in progress. Very important. Second, and maybe we can please put on a slide, product is very relevant. If you look to batteries, batteries are dangerous goods, as everybody knows, potentially strict regulations, UN, we have some legal books like ADR or RAD for road or for train transportation, for instance. So we need to have approved certified packaging. And we have 5 different battery types, let's say from prototypes, just tested batteries for normal use. We have obsolete batteries because they are less than 75% of capacity. It needs to get recycled. We have damaged battery, which are not obviously on fire, whatever. And we have even those ones which are really dangerous because they can even explode. So we have 5 different types of batteries, battery cells, battery modules, or even the pack at the end, yeah, which we need to handle from a product point of view with different kind of packaging. Third, very important, shown on the next slide, is providing packaging for dangerous goods. It's a much more complex process than just providing packaging for some other direct material. Why? Because it's a combination of an outside packaging and a dunnage. So it's a combination of both. And at the end of the whole process, it has become certified by an independent certification company. So, and during the process, we have to involve many, many stakeholders in order to set up very, very clear targets, to understand the needs, bringing in even suppliers for automatic decanting systems, whatever, involve really everybody who is part in the supply chain or in the value chain to understand what are the needs. And bring it from there, using standardized products as much as possible, and to go for the certification at the end of the process, which takes typically 3 to 6 months of time. What we can recommend, and is another very important factor to the industry, is lessons learned from the past. Let's try to standardize as much as possible the packaging, outside dimensions, but as well the dunnage.
Yeah, thanks, Jürgen. And you know, interesting there to just to touch upon a couple of new products fit for the new market. Something that springs to mind is what will happen to existing products. We talk about recyclability, circular economy. Can you talk a little bit about plans for what you're doing for existing products and packaging solutions in circulation?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Richard. Another one. So what we did 2 years ago already, we said, why inventing the wheel from scratch? Is it really necessary? So we decided to use standardized dimensions which are already in place to use as well for our so-called product ion pack, which is a special product for the battery transportation. So it's not the outer, let's say, bin is not 100% the same, but from the dimension, this is the same product. It is certified, of course, but in general, it's a standard product, which we decided to do so just for cost optimization. If we need to go for something brand new, obviously it would be more expensive. The only tricky thing is all the bins related to your question, Richard, which are in the market, which are not certified, cannot become certified in the future. That's not possible. So it's only related to brand new products, which are based on standard products in place.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jürgen. And I'd like to take this opportunity to bring back Justus and Isobel for the wider panel. And I'll dive straight into a question that's come from the audience. And as a reminder to the audience, our panel are accessible. So do comment, do challenge, and do get your questions in, pick their brains, and we'll get to as many as we can. So question for Isobel. Thanks to Ben Crew for sending this through. Given the forecasted future supply versus demand outlook for lithium-ion, how do you feel about the UK's position in the European supply base as we move forward?
So an interesting question, and that could be looked at from several different angles. I think that the UK is in a particularly good position. We have a very, very strong chemical sector in the UK. And as we start looking to the future of the battery industry and the fact we need to stop shipping these materials around the world several times, because that doesn't help with the carbon footprint, we need to repatriate some of those processes back to the European continent in general. But the UK is in a really good position to capitalize on that. And why I think that is because we can't simply pick up some of these legacy processes that have been used traditionally in China, because we'd never get the permitting in Europe for them. We have to reimagine those manufacturing processes. And we need to start looking at more efficient conversion of materials into the products that go into the front end of the gigaplants so that we can make the cells that the automotive industry is going to need. So renewables is going to play a really, really important part of that. And of course, the cost of energy in Europe is higher than it is in China. So there's a secondary reason to be much more efficient as far as the manufacturing process is concerned. Not only reduce the carbon content by using renewables, but try to use as few renewables as possible so that we don't end up with a high conversion cost. So those process innovations is something that the UK has been very, very strong on traditionally. And actually, we have some of the base raw materials here in the UK already. So the best needle coke in the world for making synthetic graphite actually comes out to the North Sea and gets pumped to shore in Lincolnshire, and it's part of the last elements of the fractional distillation process for crude oil. So at the moment, that goes from the UK to China and Mongolia and gets milled and graphitized and carbon coated. Then it gets sent everywhere else. From a carbon content, that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And if we look at a new graphitization process, which is less energy intensive, and I'm just using this as an example, the current process, 80% of the energy goes into heating up the equipment and 20% of it goes into actually heating the material and doing the graphitization itself. A reimagined process is going to spend less time heating up equipment and more time heating up material. And that means we can put it here in the UK. We've got the raw material available to us. We can simply float it up the North Sea into the dock in Blythe, and we can process it on site right next to the gigaplant. That is the best supply chain I've ever seen as far as reduction of carbon content is concerned for synthetic graphite. And there are lots of other examples of this too, and we can start looking at the cathode active material manufacturing process too, and doing a very similar trick to take the carbon content or a lot of the carbon content out of that. So really taking advantage of the innovation that's available in the UK in the chemical sector and the knowledge on processing materials is really part of the secret sauce in making this work as far as a localized supply chain is concerned. And then those materials could go out and supply the rest of Europe. So I think the UK is in a pretty strong position.
Great, excellent news for our UK-based audience and stakeholders. And I was told just last week by a reliable source and a good friend of our network that container fill rates can be as low as 17% for battery cells as things stands due to weight. So that's obviously a lot of airspace right there. And it's important to that we stamp out these inefficiencies. And my question is, logistics and supply chains are optimized, enhanced, improved over time. There are little tweaks here and there to improve it, but with rapid action needed and aggressive timelines and ambitious timelines, how important is it that we get the battery supply chains and the electric vehicle supply chains correct right from the off? Perhaps I'll go to you, Justus, especially from BMW's perspective, a global company, not just European, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's a really exciting time for this uptake of electric vehicles and this incredibly increase in supply that we'll need to make it happen. And we are super excited to see what is going to happen in Europe over the next couple of years, because I think the points that Isobel has made on really having ESG at the heart of the design process of these battery electric vehicles for the supply chain as well is really an important one. What we really look favorably upon as well is what we see in terms of regulation coming in for Europe, and Isobel has touched on this as well, where we're going to have very, very strict rules on what is possible to do and what is not possible to do, and having these ESG criteria written into the legislation is actually really going to enable us to have a great innovative business case for this here in Europe. And this is not only going to apply for batteries that we make here in Europe, it's also going to be applied for batteries that we import from all over the world to sell in vehicles here in Europe. So there will be a very much of a global standard on this. And as a global company, we produce not only here, but we produce in China as well. We produce in South America. We produce in North America. So we are really looking at how we can make the supply chain work, and how can we make them efficient as well. Because every non-efficiency in the process is not only bad for CO2, it's also bad for the business case. Although I have to say, in terms of CO2, it really compared to the process of producing the battery, the logistics of shipping them around are 1 or 2 orders of magnitude smaller. And so it's really vital that we get the efficiencies in the production here in Europe right, so that these batteries that we produce here are competitive on an international market. But I have no doubt that the companies here in Europe who are working on this will have a very, very good proposal to make it.
Yeah, excellent. And I'd like to jump to the other end of the supply chain. And Jürgen, you touched upon this in terms of the recycling. So this is a new part of the supply chain, not fully developed yet. We don't have mass electrification yet, so we're not dealing with the volumes just yet. How important is it that we get this right? Do we need to be setting up these recycling plants now? Do they come further down the line? I'll throw that open. Isobel, it looks like you're prepped to speak there, so I'll go to you first.
Yeah, indeed. We have heard from Justus at the very beginning how many cars BMW will bring into the market until 2030. The overall European market, more or less driven by 6 OEMs, will bring into 150 models, I think, until 2025 already. It's a significant amount. So we see a significant increase of amount of battery cells, exponential. By the way, we will have the same starting increases numbers with make cells and packs, which are coming back to us, as you said, needs for recycling. This all is important to set up make the supply chains, packaging, but the rest of the supply chains ready for these new challenges coming up. And even not only the recycling, or maybe even the higher density of lithium-ion batteries in the future, or even new chemicals like fluoride or phosphorus or whatever it might be. I think there are much more challenges to come as well for us regarding packaging, and will impact as well the recycling process of the cells. For us, we can speak the recycling process of the bins is already managed. We buy back containers from our customers already after the life cycle and can bring them 100% back to new production.
Thanks, Jürgen, and I'll go to you, Isobel, on that, around some of the challenges around the recycling, and maybe we can touch upon the targets that are being set by the EU in terms of battery recycling and whether they're realistic or not.
Yeah, I mean, some of the numbers that Justus put up from the European Union are indicating some very, very high recycling rates, and we have to remember that, you know, as chemistry changes over time, that becomes more or less difficult depending on the chemistry. Lithium-ion phosphate, for example, is very difficult chemistry to recycle and reclaim anything out of. But the NMC materials, there are bigger opportunities, and we have to remember that these cells are going to go into cars, and the cars are going to be used for 8 to 10, maybe even 12 years before they come back. So even though we've got this massive ramp up at the moment, we're not going to see these packs coming back until the 2030s in any significant numbers. And that really affects the business case as to when you stand up the facility and when is it commercially viable to do this? When can you operate a business and turn a profit? Because at the end of the day, the investors are going to look for a return on their investment. So I think the timing of this is really critical. And I think the benefit that we've got is, even though we need to think about it now and we need to plan for it in the late 2020s, we have some time to optimize and refine these processes to make sure that we can get those recycling rates up as high as possible. At the moment, you're looking at around about 25 to 30% recycled material that you could possibly get back out of the cells. And if you want to increase the recycled content, you have to look at feedstocks coming in from other streams. But that doesn't mean to say that with improvements in the recycling process, those targets are not achievable. I just think that it's really good to have stiff targets to work towards, to push the innovation, to make sure that we eventually get to a point where it makes not only environmental and sustainable sense, but also good business sense as well, to recover those materials and reuse them. So I welcome the challenges, I really do, but I also welcome the view that we have to be realistic about when is the right time to do this and when is it going to be good from a business case to get this up and running and underway.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think if I just may, the point that we discussed earlier of when is the right time to make this investment, I think Europe is at a very good point in time now to make the investment in the battery industry, because we have processes and renewable energy technologies at our hand that we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago, and that we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago in China either. And I think the same really applies for recycling. It doesn't make sense to send up recycling factories now that can handle tons and tons of batteries that are not there. We have even trouble to find 400 batteries for our second life assembly in Leipzig, because there are just so few of them coming back. And it doesn't make sense to manifest the processes that we have today by setting up these batteries. But what we have to do is we have to think this through. We have to understand, how do we ensure that we get these battery specs? How do we get the logistics right? How do we make sure that, however the cell chemistry might be changing, we ensure that we can recover these materials and overcome the challenges that especially come from refining and extracting these materials.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I'm aware we're getting close to time, but I want to cram in as much as possible, including the results of the poll, which I've just shared. But before I get to those, something that we haven't touched too much upon, although Jürgen did, but I want to get the others' perspective. We've talked individually about a lot of competition taking place, the race to electrification, the race to create batteries. What about collaboration? How imperative is it that the industry comes together? We potentially saw a missed opportunity with certain electrification aspects of vehicles, where OEMs all manufactured and produced their own types of plugins. Do we need a standardization? Is there greater need for collaboration in order to really achieve these goals? So I'll go to you, Isobel.
I think standardization is a red herring. I think it was when you have the same cells, the same standard size cells being sold to everybody, because they're all after the same product, then standardization worked quite well. But as we move forwards into this bigger disaggregation of the market, and don't forget, when you go and buy, I'll use a BMW example, when you go and buy a 5 Series BMW, you've got a choice between a 2-litre turbo diesel and a 4.4-litre V8 M5, and there's lots of models in between. You need to provide that disaggregation within the model range as well. So that, to me, doesn't indicate that you're going to have the same cells that Mercedes are going to be using, or the same cells that the VW group are going to be using. And there is going to be differentiation in the marketplace. And I think that's going to gain traction moving forwards, because you've got your own brand attributes to take care of. So I think standardization is a bit of a red herring. I think collaboration is key. I don't think that means get all the battery manufacturers in the room and agree what you're going to make. I think the collaboration is with the automotive industry, because we need to understand, get under the skin of what your customers are expecting and the performance attributes that they're looking for from that particular brand. And then we need to collaborate very closely with the automotive industry to give you what you want rather than sell what we have. And I think that's a transitional point in the industry as we've moved away from compliance vehicles to more of an electrified fleet.
Great, thanks, Isobel. And I'll just, like I say, I have closed the poll on our question. I asked what percentage of EV batteries in Europe will be sourced regionally versus imported by 2030. And the clear winner is between 26 and 50%. So I think that's well below what the EU proposes and the targets and what we're aiming to be. So clearly there's quite a big gap between what the industry wants to achieve and what the industry feels it can achieve. So some work to do on that front. We're running just about running out of time, so I want to go to some final questions from you. Jürgen, I'll turn to you. Jürgen, from ORBIS, what can we expect in the next few years that we haven't discussed today surrounding the battery production hub in Europe?
Yeah, of course, we will focus on relevant parts of the processes. Just bringing 2 examples. What about the aftermarket? Once products, electric cars, light vehicles, or even trucks, buses, etc., are in the market, what about the aftermarket? So that's something we are working on. Damaged batteries is a very special topic. To make sure we can use them the same packaging in order to avoid for the market, for our customers to have dedicated packaging for that. Again, standardization is very important here. And of course, we are looking for other product innovations which are related, and I keep you curious for today, to the bin itself and the internal damage. More than that, we are never give up to improve our own sustainability, bringing new materials into our products. So laboratories are working on more cost-efficient materials to bring down costs as much as possible, production synergies, etc. So there's much more to come in the future. And what we should not forget, it's a new market. Even we are in this market already since 2 years. And we are learning every day. It's a journey. It's a journey for all of us. Particular for us, it is a learning curve, and I'm pretty sure we will see different things in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Jürgen. And to you, Justus, a final thought from you on what's needed to ensure Europe's battery sector and EV supply chain can develop to hit those critical targets.
Well, I mean, it really is a very, very exciting time, I think, for Europe's battery industry, and there is so much opportunity on the table here. And I mean, we believe really we're going to stay competitive on this. We want to offer the best battery electric vehicle to the customer, as we did with the best internal combustion engine vehicle to the customer. So there is, I think, great opportunity here for OEMs and battery manufacturers, and indeed suppliers and recyclers along the entire value chain to work together to move this forward. And if we put these ESG criteria at the heart of this process, we can also make a really great contribution to these overall climate targets and that everyone is discussing, and we will indeed be discussing here in the UK with COP26 just this year. So I think there's really for Europe great opportunity here. We are very happy to be part of it, and I think there's really an exciting time ahead.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Justus. A great comment to end on it. And Isobel, last and certainly not least, we've covered a lot of ground with you today. Some fantastic insights. What's one of the key takeaways you'd like to leave with our audience out of the many that you've given us today?
So I think probably the one thing I'd like to mention most is that we invented the lithium-ion battery in the first place. And I'm talking about Europe. Yes, it was in Oxford in the UK, but it was a European invention. And if we had had the foresight and the courage to commercialize it when it was invented here in Europe, we would already have a much more sustainable supply chain. We would already be in the best place in the world to take advantage of this tipping point in electrification. And because we didn't have that foresight, because we didn't have the courage and we didn't have the investment, it's now the Far East that has the opportunity. We need to reclaim that crown. We need to get back ahead of the curve, and we need to build a world-class battery industry to support our automotive industry in the European Union. And don't forget, it's one of the best automotive industries in the world. You know, the American industry can't touch us on quality. The Japanese can't touch us on style. And the Chinese are way, way, way behind us as far as practical usable vehicles are concerned. So we have a golden opportunity to learn the mistakes of the past and make sure we don't repeat them in the future.
Fantastic. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. The challenge has been laid down. Thank you so much to my three brilliant panelists. I've really enjoyed it, and I could have kept going for a good few hours, but clearly, as you're all changing the industry, I'll let you get back to your day jobs. But thank you so much for spending the time with us now, and I look forward to follow-up conversations with you all and seeing how the progress is being made. That's it for this session. Thanks to you, the audience, for your participation, and thanks again to the panel. Stick around. We've got a couple of sessions coming up, and yeah, looking forward to it.